So for this part 2 of the series, we are going to be adding the fusible fleece to your pieces. So what you should have at this point are 2 completed bag pieces. You have the front piece and then the back piece. And so now we need to attach the fusible fleece. So for the fusible fleece, you'll probably just want to measure your piece, and you'll want the wrong side of your project touching the bumpy side or the glue side of the fusible fleece. And so mine ended up measuring about 17.5 inches by 26.5 inches. But you'll probably just want to measure it to fit your piece in case maybe you did wider seams. You might not need as much, or just in case there's any other variables making yours a different size. So once you have this down to fit, you can cut the corners out. You're not going to need these corner pieces. And then also you will just head over to the iron to press the fusible to the quilted piece. And I like to use a steamy iron, and if I press from the top here, then it seems to melt up the fusible a little bit quicker. So we'll just head over to the iron and do that, and I'll do that for both pieces, the front and the back panel. All right, so we'll be ready to quilt each of the pieces now. What I have done is I have centered my needle again. So this whole entire project I've sewn at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I've centered my needle. That means when I look at my presser foot, from the needle to the right of the edge of the presser foot, it's a 1/4 inch, and from the needle to the left of the edge of the presser foot, it's a 1/4 inch. This is going to help me when I start to do this next process. So what I'm going to do is I am going to start doing the quilting for all the vertical pieces. So I'm going to start right here on this side of the seam. I'm going to line the edge of my foot up and stitch over here. And that would be on the right edge of the foot, and then my stitching will be about a 1/4 inch away. And then I'll line the line up right here with the left side of my presser foot, and my quilting will be a 1/4 inch this way. And I'll repeat that all the way down, and I'll do that all the way across on all the verticals. Then I will flip going this direction, and I'll start right here, go all the way down, do this row. So in the end, all of your squares will have 2 rows of quilting a 1/4 inch away from your original seam. Now this part of the project you will have visible thread, so you'll want to choose a thread either that accents, blends in, or is coordinating with several of your fabrics. Because all my fabrics are different colors, I've chosen this light gray. It will probably appear pretty much white when it is stitched, but I basically just want it to kind of blend in and go unnoticed as much as possible. All right, when you have finished machine quilting your panels, I like to flip them over on the back side because I think it's easier to see if you've missed any spots. And I've gotten these all covered. Basically, you're looking for these intersection points. Every now and again, I'll forget to do one of the sides or one of the areas. So this panel is finished. I just have to go back and repeat the same process with my other one. All right, so we are going to end up sewing the 3 sides of this bag right here, and then across the bottom. You are not going to follow the line of the corners. We're going to leave this corner area open. And so the bottom will get sewn, and then the 2 sides. I've already sewn this side just to show you what it would look like. So we've got a 1/4 inch seam. We'll have the pieces right sides together. And when you're lining it up, especially on the side, it doesn't matter as much on the bottom because you won't see it, but on the side piece, go inside and look at your seams and line them up straight and even so that they look like they have really nice sharp corners, not overlapping, to the best of your ability. And then 1/4 inch seam to secure that, okay? And you'll you'll want to leave the top open again, and then the bottom is going to be sewn. So only sew 1, 2, 3. I've sewn the 3 sides now, and so this piece, this is the outer piece. It's not finished yet, but we're getting close. So what we're gonna do is just set this aside for a second, and you're gonna take out whatever fabric you were gonna use for your liner. Now, mine has a direction to it because it has these owls on it. And in a perfect world, my fabric would be wide enough across, folded, so that I could just lay my piece down, but that can't happen. If you don't have a direction to your liner fabric, you could just turn your project this way and cut out 2 pieces at once. If I was using just a solid or any other type of print that it doesn't matter on the direction, that is what I would do. I would just have my pieces folded, or my liner piece folded, and then I would cut out 2 pieces at once. But because mine has a direction to it, I am going to have to open up the fabric. All right, so it may jump a little bit in the video. I had a little bit of an interruption. So what I was saying was, because of the direction of this fabric and the width of the fabric, I am gonna have to open it up. So I had it folded in half off the bolt, and now I've just opened it up all the way. So I've got my selvages here and over here, and I'll just lay the piece on top of it. And it doesn't have to be pinned to cut it out. I'm just actually gonna use my ruler and rotary cutter to just trim away the extra fabric around it. And I'm gonna take my 2 liner pieces, and we're gonna make sure that both of them have the design up here. That'll be the top. I'm gonna lay them right sides together. And they may not be perfectly exactly the same size, but that is okay. I'm gonna try to get them lined up across the top. And when I'm laying my piece on top here, I'm gonna line it up across the top as well. This acts as my pattern piece. Okay. So again, I still may need to trim a little bit. Now use your regular sewing shears to just trim out around the corner. And I can set this aside. I'm gonna pin this piece so that I can just remind myself what I need to do. I'm going to sew along the 2 sides. Oh, I need to trim this side up. Okay, so I need to sew along both of the sides, and then on the bottom of the liner I'm going to leave an opening that's several inches wide. So I'm going to put double pins in 2 places just to remind myself that I do not want to sew in that area. And once again, when I'm making this, I am not going to sew around this corner area. I'm going to leave that unsewn. All right, so we need to work on the handle next, and you can either use one solid strip of fabric. The fabric itself would need to be 3.5 inches wide by 23 inches long. But what I've done is I've got some extra squares left over that are 5-inch squares. I'm going to end up sewing those together and making 2 matching handles with the different squares. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take each one of these to the machine, lay them right sides together, sew a 1/4 inch seam across, and then I'll just continue attaching pieces until I have a 23-inch long piece, and I'll do that for both handles. Alright, so I've sewn all of my 5-inch squares together. I'm going to press the seams open. My husband just ran out and got me a new ironing board cover. If you noticed, it's changed, so pretty excited to have a new one. But anyway, so I'm going to press these seams open. And again, if you are using a full strip of fabric, You may choose to do this a different way. The actual instructions call for a smaller fabric by the width, but I'll show you how I do it. So this will be 5 inches wide by, in the end it will be 23 inches long. Right now it becomes a little bit longer than that, and I'll show you next what I do to accommodate the length. Okay, so I press all those seams open, and then I'm just going to press one side over about 3/8 of an inch. Just press it under. And what that does is it gives you like a little lip for the fusible fleece to slide under in the next process. So I'm just pressing this under 3/8. Okay, and then I'm going to take the fusible fleece, and I've got the bumpy side with the glue. It's going to go underneath that fold. I've got to go underneath the fold. Okay, so kind of underneath that lip, or underneath that edge, slide it under there. And then I will fold the other side in. And what I've done is I've left a little bit of room at the end here and about an equal amount down here. And I'll just trim those off later. Okay, so I'm going to first press this over all the way down, and it's just even with that fusible fleece. At this point, I'm not folding the fleece at all. I'm just pressing that edge over, okay? And then once that's pressed, and this is pressed over, now I'm going to fold this end in to where it meets up with the other edge, and basically I'm just now folding the handle in half. So then you have a sturdier handle because it is 2 layers of fusible fleece that are folded over, okay? The trick here is just making sure that the that lip that you folded over stays on top of the fusible fleece, and also that you don't burn yourself with the steam. So keep that all going down to the end. I also try to kind of line up my seam a little bit. All right, now we can go to the cutting table and trim the ends off, and then we'll be ready to sew the handles. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of feel the end here of the handle. Gonna give it a little trim. You could use scissors to do that also. Or for that matter, if you had a longer piece of fusible fleece, you could make longer handles. It's really up to you. So I am going to now place in just a few pins along the open edge, and I'm just doing that to ensure that, again, those corners match up where my seams met, and then also making sure that the folded edge stays folded under, just to look nicer if everything's tucked in and folded nice and neat. Okay, so next I am going to do the same thing with this handle, and then I'll be ready to take it over to the machine. Okay, so what I need to do is first I'm going to top stitch close to this open edge, then I'll top stitch to this edge just to make them symmetrical, and then I'll go in and quilt equal parts all the way down, and I'll repeat that on both handles. Okay, so we have finished with our handles now, and I just love how they turn out using the extra 5-inch square pieces, and it just coordinates so well, obviously, with the bag since it's using the same pieces. But that step is all done, and the next thing we need to do is we need to make the buttonhole attachment. So this will be the little flap that folds over from one side of the bag to the other, and we'll have the buttonhole on it so that we can attach a button to the bag and be able to close up the top of the bag. Alright, so we're going to decide on a fabric to use for the closure. I'm going to use this blue square. I just took all my leftover pieces and laid them right here because that's where that will be, and I liked having that little pop of blue right there. These are just more 5-inch squares, so I've got 2 5-inch squares. You could also do one color on one side and another color on the other. It really is totally up to you. And then you need a 5-inch square of the fusible fleece. So I've got those pieces ready. Now you'll lay your fusible fleece down. I've got my bumpy side up. Then I'm going to lay oops, that goes that way. Lay my square on top of it. And this one has the right side up. And then this next square is going to have the right side down. Okay, so they're kind of layered on top the fleece, and then the other two pieces are right sides together. Then on one end of, so I'm going to choose this side, we're going to measure over 1.5 inches and put a little mark. And then from the other end, I'm going to measure in 1.5 inches. And then from the edge, from this edge right here, I'm going to measure 1.5 inches and put a mark. And same thing with the other side, so 1.5 and put a mark. So I actually should have put this down here by the edge. So then I'm going to connect my dots. So I'm going 1.5 inches in and 1.5 inches over. Draw a diagonal. Same here. 1.5 inches in and 1.5 inches over. And now I am going to just place a pin in to hold these pieces together. One on each side. Okay. And then you'll just take your shears, and on these lines, you're just going to trim off those parts that you drew the purple line on. Okay. Those are just discarded. And now I'm going to go to my machine, and I'm going to start right here at the top. So this looks kind of like a pocket that you would put on a shirt or something. I'm going to start right here at the top. This will be a 1/4 inch seam, so I'm going to stitch down, pivot, 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 pivot here, and then back up here. And I will want to backstitch where I stopped and where I started, but then I'm going to leave this top part completely open. All right, so we've just sewn along the edges, excluding the top. We didn't sew across there. So you'll want to put your fingers between the two pieces of fabric and just flip it inside out, so that, or right side out, so that the batting is in the middle. And you will want to take something like a closed pair of shears or something and poke out the corners to make them as flat as possible. Okay, and then we will press it with the iron to smooth it out. So then in just a second, we'll be putting a buttonhole right in here. We actually do need to top stitch around the edge again. So we still don't need to do anything with this top open part, but we are going to top stitch just around the edge that we had sewn after we press it. All right, so we are ready to now attach our buttonhole foot to the machine. So what you want to do is you want to look for your actual button that you are using. I'm at home, and so I found this red button that's gonna have to work because I don't really have that many choices. At school, we have a really big container of white and black buttons. You'll want to look for those in the supply room box that has the zippers, the elastic, Velcro, that type of thing. There's a whole bunch of buttons in there. What you do is you take your buttonhole foot and you sit your button in the back of it there, okay? Now what you need to then do is there's this little lever right here. You're gonna pull it tight until it squeezes your button. So now if I tip this over, the button stays in there. What that is doing is this is setting the gauge down here for what size of a buttonhole to put in, okay? So that's the first step, is just to put your button in the buttonhole foot. You need to push the button on the back of the presser foot to release your regular J foot. And put it in your drawer here just so you don't misplace it. And then you look for the bar that runs right across here, and you line that up with the little hook that's coming down. It will grab a hold of that bar. Okay, the same thing that was holding up the presser foot before. You may have to lift your presser foot lifter just a little bit to get it under there. So you just line them up and then snap it in place. So now my button foot attachment is on. Then you need to adjust your machine. So right now, I had just turned my machine on, so it's on a 1. I need to turn it to 34. And if you look on your screen, 33, 34, 35, 36, and 37 are all different buttonhole functions. So we're on 34, ready to do a buttonhole. The next thing we need to do is mark the placement on our flap. This is going to be sewn onto the bag, okay? So what you need to do this, I'm going to lay it down right here, is you need to have a marking pen handy. Wherever you put your mark, you're going to line the mark up in just a minute with a grid that's on the presser foot for the buttonhole. Wherever you put your mark, that is going to be the bottom of your buttonhole. So if I want the bottom of my buttonhole to be right here, then that's where I need to put my dot, okay? So if I measure, basically here I'm going to measure up from this 1 inch. Actually, I'm going to do it 3/4 of an inch. Now you have a little bit of flexibility on this, and you don't have to do it in the exact same spot that I do, but I'm going to put mine there. So I'm just using a purple marker, because then it'll erase on its own over time. I don't know if you can see that. So 3/4 of an inch from the bottom, centered along the bottom half, is a little dot. Okay, so I'm going to look at that dot when I go over here to the buttonhole. Alright, so we have our machine on stitch 34, we have our buttonhole attachment put on. Next thing you need to do is grab this gray lever right here. Okay, you want to grab it, and there is a white, kind of like a bar on the buttonhole attachment. That gray piece needs to go behind it. Okay, so if you're looking at the machine from the front, that gray attachment goes behind the white bar. Okay, once you have that down, then you can slide your fabric in place, and we are looking for that purple dot. So if you look inside the presser foot there, the buttonhole, that purple dot is right there, centered. Okay, I need to actually pull it over this way just a little bit. Okay, so when you see that in the middle there of that opening, then you can go ahead and drop your needle. Okay, so we have lined the purple dot up in the opening of that presser foot. Now I'm going to drop my needle. I'm going to lower, actually I'm going to lift my needle back up because I saw that it jumped. There we go. Now it's in the right spot. So I'm starting out right there. Now the presser foot, you have to make sure your presser foot is down, and then you put your foot on the foot pedal, and the machine knows where to start it and where to stop it. It'll just do the whole process. All you have to do is keep your foot on the pedal, and when the machine is done, it will stop stitching. It'll just bounce back and forth in the same spot. Okay, so right there it slowed down, and now it's just kind of jumping back and forth in the same spot. Now I can stop, okay? Lift my needle, lift my presser foot, slide this out of there, okay? Cut my threads as usual. Then I'll want to take this foot off, put the other foot back on, and return to a stitch length or a stitch selector of 2 for a centered needle position. But you should have something that looks similar to that right there. Notice how you can still kind of see that purple dot, so that shows you that's the very base or the very bottom of your buttonhole. Okay, you'll go ahead and you'll trim off any loose threads. Okay, now this is a really good tip and trick when you're making a buttonhole, is to take, and I have a long quilting pin, I'm going to take it and go horizontally across. Okay, and this is just right underneath where the buttonhole ends. What that does is it prevents me from ripping through my stitching. So you're going to take a seam ripper, you're going to insert the ripper at the very bottom of the buttonhole, right above where the stitching started, and then you're just going to rip up towards your pin, but because that pin is there, I'm not going to rip through the stitching, okay? Then I can take my pin out and I can go over to where my buttonhole is, which is still inside the buttonhole attachment. What you have to do now is just push on that little lever down at the bottom, and then your button comes out. And so you can take your button and just make sure that it fits through the opening, okay? So now we're done with making all the parts and pieces of the bag. We just now have to put it all together. Okay, quick little inventory just to make sure you're up to speed. You should have your almost finished front and back piece, your almost finished liner piece. You should have 2 finished handles that are not attached yet, and a finished flap with a buttonhole that is not attached yet. Okay, you'll want to get your pins handy. And now we are going to finish up the boxed corner here. And this is just one method of doing a box corner. Sometimes you'll see it done where it is completely sewn and then you trim off a corner. But for this one, it is planned with the corner in mind. So you're gonna bring these 2 seams together. And I hadn't pressed that open yet, but we'll wanna just kind of finger press that seam open and line those up. You'll place a pin right there and then pull it out smooth and straight along both sides, okay? So right here, I need to put a pin, and then also right over here, I need to put a pin. So I've got that pinned on this side. I'm gonna do the same thing with this end. So next we're going to go take these over that we just pinned and sew a 1/4 of an inch seam across all of the ends. I actually may do closer to a 3/8 just for security purposes. I was noticing on the outer bag that my fusible fleece does not quite extend out to the ends on all the sides, so I may be a little bit closer to a 3/8 seam allowance. Just try to keep it equal on all of your seams to make it uniform on all 4. So we've just boxed out the corners. Now we're gonna turn this with the right side out. And what you wanna do is you wanna run along all of your seams, especially that bottom one that you just did, and make sure that you caught all of the fabric in there so you don't have any holes. Okay, so we're gonna take our handles and we're going to place them on, so here's the very center of the bag. So you've got 1 square, 2 squares, 3 squares coming from each end. So it would be between 2 and 3. I'm gonna lay my strap. I'm gonna center it. The center of the strap is gonna go right in front of that seam. Okay, and then I'll just put a pin in. And you'll wanna use some pins that have some bend to them. The next thing I'm gonna do is just swing this other handle around, okay? Making sure not to twist it or, you know, fold it over. So I am going to line it right here. Then we'll do the same thing on the other side with the other handle. But on this side, I'm also going to attach my buttonhole flap. Okay, so there's my pinned on handle. Now my buttonhole flap is also going to go on the same side. And notice how none of these things are up here at the top. Of course, when I'm carrying the bag, I'll carry the handles up at the top. But everything is sewn on going down toward the bottom of the bag. So I've got my 1 handle on, buttonhole, and then I'm gonna flip this over. And I do want my handles to match. So on this side, I started with the polka dot. So I'm gonna do the same thing here. I'm gonna have my polka dot right here. And then bring this around and do the yellow right there. Okay, so now we are ready to attach these. We're going to attach using a 1/4 inch seam, but I am going to go back and forth at least twice per handle. So like what I'll do right here is I'm going to go back and forth a few times, and then I'll do the same thing here. That's going to carry a lot of the weight of the bag is the handles, so back and forth, back and forth. Same thing with the buttonhole flap, across a couple times, and the other end of the handle. So it'll take you a few stitches to get it all done, but you'll be happy later that your handles don't start coming off or the buttonhole flap doesn't start falling off. Okay, now you just want to go back over that spot that you just, all those areas that you sewed the handle and the flap, and trim up any of your loose threads. You might have quite a few of them. Okay. All right, so now the final step of putting it all together, we've got the outer bag still right side out, and the inner liner is going to have the wrong sides out. And so we will just tuck the bag down inside of the liner. It seems opposite of what you would want, because you're going to want the liner to be on the inside and the bag to be on the outside. But for sewing it, this is how it has to go together. So you'll want to line up your side seam right here, so the side of the bag with the side of the liner. That is a mess. I'm going to trim that off and put a pin in right there. And then I'm going to make sure that the flap from the buttonhole and the handles are going down into the bag. So those are going to go down inside that way. Okay. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to match up this side seam on the other side. Okay. So I'll put a pin in there. Continue around on this side, making sure that your handle is going down. Okay, and then now you just add as many pins as you feel you need to do the best job that you can. If you are experienced and you are good with like manipulating the fabric and moving it, you won't need as many. Okay, and now you may remember at the stage when we were sewing the sides of the liner, we left an opening at the bottom. So because we left that opening at the bottom, we are going to completely close this top part up, and then we'll flip the whole entire bag through that opening. So you'll want to, real quick, before you actually start sewing here, you want to look down there and make sure that you still have an opening. Okay, so the whole entire bag eventually will be coming through this open spot. Okay, now we are ready to sew the top edge of the bag. Make sure that you catch all of it, so you get all the layers. You get the liner and then both sides of the bag all caught in your seam. So this will be sewn at a 1/4 of an inch or between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch. If you're worried about your handles not catching, then it's no big deal really to do a little bit of a wider seam allowance. All right, so I've gone ahead, I'm going to do a 1 on my stitch selector, and then that way I'm going to still use the edge of my presser foot, but I'm going to be a little bit closer to 3/8. And I'm going to start here at one of my sides. Okay, so I'm using the edge of the presser foot. I am going to backstitch where I stop and where I start. I'm also keeping an eye on my thread. You'll want to probably keep an eye on your bobbin and your thread to make sure you're not running out. Just stitch all the way around, even with the edge of the foot. Okay, so I recommend you go back across your bag all the way around, looking for your seam and making sure that you caught all parts of the bag all the way around and that it's not ever too close to the edge where it might rip a hole. So if like my stitching was way up here, then it could easily pull out. So just want to double check that before you flip it. Okay, so you're going to use this opening down here. We're just going to take the bag. So this is the exterior part of the bag, and we're going to just kind of wiggle it loose through the hole. And hopefully it all just pulls out easily for you. Okay. All right, so now I've got my liner out. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave the liner out for now because I'm going to take it over here to the iron. And well, first of all, you'll want to do as I'm doing here, which is like poking out your side corners. Okay. You might have a thread or two. We can clip those loose. Okay, but now I want to turn under that opening. So the opening that I had left at the bottom. And this is going to be inside the bottom of the bag when it's finished. So it's up to you how you finish it off. I'm actually just going to machine finish it. But if you were really particular about that, you could hand sew like a ladder stitch in there, and then you wouldn't be able to see it. So if you are concerned about having an invisible stitch, you could do a hand ladder stitch. But I'm going to put in a machine stitch, just a top stitch really close to the edge right there. The bag looks done, but it's not. You're going to stuff the lining down in there, and then you're going to press it really well to get the seam to lay flat right here, okay? Because we're going to go top stitch around in just a second.
Oh, it's okay.
Okay, so next you want to put in a top stitch. I have pinned, as I was pressing it, I pinned the liner so that it would go toward the inside. And I'm going to do a little bit of a wider top stitch than I normally do. So I'm going to put my needle on the center position. I am going to find a corner or a side somewhere where I'm not worried about seeing it. That's where my needle will start. Okay, so I'm just going to line the edge of my foot up, and it's going to be about 1/4 of an inch top stitch. Nothing like finishing a project with this much thread left. So we are on the almost last step. The only other thing we have to do now is attach the actual button. Press it one last time, and then you would be ready to fill out your reflection sheet that goes with this and turn it in with the scoring guide. One final little tip before you put your button on: you want to keep in mind how the person who's using this bag might use it. And so I don't want to, this bag is empty right now. If I pulled this closed and put my button right here, then my bag could never be like as full as possible. So if I might fill this bag up with something, I might want to put the button up a little bit higher. It just gives it a little bit more room for you. If you want to still have the button closed but have the bag full, put the button higher. And on this seam, so it's the seam that's centered between the handles, I would put my button like right about here. I'm not going to do that on camera. If you're not sure how to put a button on, you could just look on YouTube and watch any kind of button video. Some of the buttons that we have might be 2-hole buttons, and some might be 4. So you would just want to watch a video for that type of button and put it. This is about 1 inch away from the top. You could do it a little further down, but again, you want to make sure that if your bag was really full, you would still be able to close it.